Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important articles. Today's newspaper is dominated by articles from international relations and also few from science and technology. So let's cover all these topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiatives, do support us with your likes and comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Because Unacademy is bringing out many initiatives to help the IAS aspirants. We have launched stage 2 of Conquer Prelims 2025. Under which we are covering the most important static topics for the upcoming prelims. This series will be conducted from the 10th of February, that is, it started from yesterday. It will continue till 24th Feb, every day at 7 p.m. on our YouTube channel. So do ensure that you catch these sessions every day at 7 p.m. and you can find the schedule in the PPT which has been provided over here. I've added the daily schedule, you can take a look at it later as well. Then those who are preparing for 2026 and beyond, Unacademy is offering a massive discount on the subscription fee. A flat 50% discount where you can get our IAS courses at very reasonable prices, along with a 6-month free extension if you enroll before the 13th of Feb. And those who subscribe to Iconic program, they will even get access to the printed notes of Indian economy by Mrunal Patel sir. So this course will give you access to all our classes, including the English batch, which is starting from 11th Feb. It will give you access to the test series, the study material, one-on-one doubt resolution and mentorship as well. All you have to do is enter the code IAS English. So those interested can click on the link provided in the description box below. Then please ensure you join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code, because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF of this session so that you will have your ready notes with you. And do join our official Telegram channel. The link for the same is provided in the video description, because after the session ends, we'll conduct a daily quiz on these topics so you can revise these articles again. With this, let's get started with the first topic from page number 6. This article is essentially suggesting that India should act as a bridge between the global north and the global south. The writer makes a few interesting arguments regarding how India has always been a leader of the global south and how we have been championing the cause of the global south countries. And going forward, how India can become a bridge to link the global north and the global south to bring about development in the global south countries. That is the essential argument of this article. So here, I would like to go a little beyond the article and go a little deep into this topic, as it can be very important for your mains exam as well. So for those who are just beginners, you may get confused with the terms global north and global south. You may think it's just referring to north and south directions. But please understand, in the world of geopolitics, global north and global south refers to the developed countries and developing underdeveloped countries respectively. There is something called the Brandt line, which was proposed by the then Chancellor of West Germany in 1980. So the line has been named after the then Chancellor of West Germany, Brandt. It's called the Brandt line, which essentially divides the developed world from the developing underdeveloped world. So this imaginary line roughly circles the globe at around 30° north latitude. So those countries above it represent the global north, which comprise of all the developed industrialized countries such as United States and Canada, the European countries, etc. Then those countries to the south of it, across Latin America, Africa and Asia and all the small island countries, they constitute the small, weak and developing and poor countries. So the developmental divide between these countries is what leads to the distinction and differentiation between them. Also, in global geopolitics and in the world order, there are fundamental differences between the demands and needs of the global north and the needs and demands of the global south. So this often brings them into conflict as well at global platforms such as United Nations, World Trade Organization, Climate Change Convention, etc. So India has always positioned itself as a leader of the global south. As a developing nation that emerged out of the horrors of colonial imperial exploitation, India has championed itself and positioned itself as a leader of the global south in order to provide a voice to the weaker countries. In fact, right from independence, India has been acting as an amplifier to raise the voice of the global south countries at the global level. For example, if you remember the days of Prime Minister Nehru, if you have read about Nehru's foreign policy, India took a strong stand against colonialism, imperialism, opposed Western interference, and stood with weaker countries, developing, underdeveloped countries, and gave them a voice as we championed the non-aligned movement during the Cold War period. So thus, India gave a new ideology to the world with other like-minded countries when the world was divided between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. So India stood with many African countries to support their independence from colonial rule. We supported several poor and developing nations in their human development, in their economic growth and economic development. Even today, you find this policy to be continuing in India's foreign relations. Recently, for example, when Pravasi Bharatiya Divas was organized in Bhubaneswar in Odisha, Prime Minister Modi addressed the gathering comprising of eminent personalities from the Indian diaspora, and he pointed out how India is playing this role to lead the global south countries. We assist several poor developing nations and weak countries in their growth and development, and this is often referred to as South-South cooperation. When two or more developing nations work together and support each other, it's often referred to as South-South cooperation. So India has been a champion of South-South cooperation since our independence. So Prime Minister Modi's statements during the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas that India is the leader of the global south, we are looking to amplify the voice of the global south, was in many ways a reminder, or in many ways it was similar to the priority that Prime Minister Nehru had given post-independence to champion India as the voice of the global south countries. Maybe then India's motivation was to champion a new ideology, the non-aligned movement in a divided world. But now India has a different priority. Especially in last 3 decades, India has been pushing South-South cooperation and giving a voice to the underrepresented countries. You take climate change negotiations, for example. Since 1990s, India has been championing the concerns and demands of the small island countries and the least developed countries. When we pushed for the CBDR principle, common but differentiated responsibilities, which was adopted into the Kyoto Protocol, it was India which raised the voice of the developing nations and the poor countries and took a stand against the developed countries which were responsible for historical emissions. You look at WTO negotiations, especially on subjects like subsidies, food security, agriculture. It has been India which has been championing these issues that primarily affect the developing nations and the poor countries. Now, recently, the Modi government has taken this policy one step forward by championing the voice of the Global South Summit. When India was preparing to host the G20 in 2023, in the run-up to the G20 summit, India brought up the concerns of the South countries and organized this new initiative called Voice of Global South Summit. Till date, 3 editions of this summit have taken place under India's leadership, and India successfully ensured the inclusion of African Union into the G20 as well as a result of this collaboration with the Global South countries. During the G20 hosted by India, it was India which pushed for the membership to African Union, to G20, which was accepted by the G20 countries. We have brought up the concerns of the Global South through this initiative, And last year as well, when the third Voice of Global South Summit was held, India's role as the leader of the Global South was very clear, very evident. Now the writer is pointing out that why are we doing this? Are we doing this just to compete with China? There is one narrative which believes that India is exerting its influence amongst the Global South countries primarily to counter Chinese influence and to protect India's interests. While this argument might be true to some extent, but that is not the entire purpose of India's South-focused initiatives. Now, for example, in places like Africa, or even if you take Latin America and the oceanic regions, definitely we are in competition with China. Look at the India-China rivalries in the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific and beyond. Definitely there is an objective on India's part, a motivation on India's part to leverage these ties with developing countries, poor countries and weaker countries and support them to protect our own influence and our own interests, which could help us counter the rising Chinese influence. But that alone is not the primary purpose and motivation of our engagement with the Global South. In fact, India has a much larger purpose. If India wants to champion itself as a global leader, as an emerging global power, then India will need the support of many other countries. So this is not just about countering China. This is not just about taking a stand against the Western countries and the developed industrialized countries. This goes beyond these divisions that you see in the geopolitical order. It is rooted in India's rise as a global power. So the writer strongly believes that India has great potential to act as a bridge. Instead of dividing the world, instead of seeing this as a geopolitical competition and a rivalry and dividing the world further, we need to use this as a uniting factor to create a bridge between the North and the South. And India is in that unique position. We are in that sweet spot where India can actually link the West and the Global South, China and the Global South. And India can champion a new narrative. It need not be focused on countering the West or countering China. Well, of course, it will serve that interest as well. But beyond that, India needs to position itself as a leader of the Global South, which can bridge the divisions between the developed countries and the developing countries. So the writer believes that for India to succeed in this regard, we need to ensure that we listen to the Global South countries as well. India can't just focus on investments, provide development partnership, run some schemes and programs to win over these poor countries and small countries. That alone is not enough. If you're building a donor-recipient relationship, this alone may not be sufficient to protect India's long-term interests. If India truly has to become a friend of the Global South, if India should be seen as a leader of these developing, underdeveloped countries, we need to move beyond the donor-recipient relationship. We need not extract any benefits from them. We need not enforce ourselves on them, because otherwise that would give an impression that we are like a big brother. That there would be no difference between US, China and other hegemonic powers which have exploited the relations with weaker countries only for their selfish interests. So India has been above this in the past, and we should continue to remain above this in the present and future as well. Of course, India will have its own economic and strategic interests, but we need to look beyond that. We need to provide genuine partnership, a equal, mutual, respectable partnership. Treat the other country as a equal partner. This is something which is very crucial to drive our Global South diplomacy. If you exert yourself like China does, or how Western countries have exploited the Global South, then there won't be any difference between India and these powers. China already has a very bad reputation in Africa and around the Global South countries. Western countries have always been desisted across the developing world. So India need not become another China or US or another Europe. We need to champion a respectable, mutual, equal partnership by treating even small, weak countries as equal partners. Build a genuine partnership which is mutually beneficial, which can help both the sides achieve and protect their interests. Fortunately, India's foreign policy has always focused on this. For example, if you look at Africa, India has made big investments in key sectors of human development such as education and healthcare. You might have heard about the Pan-African E-Network project of India. It was an idea that was floated by former President APJ Abdul Kalam, who saw the suffering in Africa, the backwardness with regard to education and healthcare, and suggested that India could play a role by leveraging ISRO's satellites to provide tele-education and telemedicine to African countries free of cost. It was this idea that was turned into the Pan-African E-Network project by Ministry of External Affairs. Today, multiple African countries are benefiting from the Pan-African E-Network project of India, where we are providing tele-education, telemedicine services, linking African schools and colleges with Indian schools and universities, linking African patients with Indian hospitals. So that is a clear illustration of how India seeks mutually beneficial partnerships, unlike the one-sided relationships that China, US and other Western powers have pursued. This is something that should continue. India should offer such partnerships which will benefit the other party as well. Focus more on human development. This is where India can offer a lot to these developing countries and poor countries. We can share our rich expertise in governance and in development. Look at our rural development programs, women empowerment schemes. Look at initiatives like Mission Life, which has been championed by Prime Minister Modi, that focuses on environmental consciousness along with sustainable inclusive development. So India can offer these lessons to the other countries and assist in their overall growth and development. Currently, we have a capacity building program known as ITEC, Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, through which MEA provides for training and capacity building initiatives in other countries, provides scholarships to students from other countries as well, which has been a big hit in many poor countries and developing nations. Countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives, Fiji, African nations, they've all benefited from the ITEC initiative. So India should build on those programs, run skill development programs in other countries, strengthen education, healthcare, even infrastructure in other countries, so that it can benefit the small poor countries as well, the developing nations as well, while protecting India's economic and strategic interests. So if India can follow this path of respectable mutual partnerships, if we listen to the poor countries, understand their concerns and demands, and give them equal respect, treat them like equal partners, then India is in the perfect ideal position to be a leader of the global south and thus act as a bridge to link the global south with the global north. So it's a very profound argument that the writer is making in this column, and I feel it's very important for your mains exam. So let's see what kind of question can be asked. In the mains exam, a question like this can be given. New Delhi's aspiration to be the voice of the global south can take shape if it also learns to listen, analyze. So what you can do is, you can talk about the approach of India towards the global south countries, how historically we have supported the global south, acted as an amplifier, providing a voice to the downtrodden countries. Or maybe you can start out with an introduction where you explain this concept of global north and global south. So either of the approaches can be taken. Then in the body, list out India's initiatives as we were discussing, how we have always championed the aspirations of the global south. Give some examples, maybe 3 or 4 examples, and point out how India can further act as a leader of the global south and bridge the divide between global north and global south. But for that, we need to listen. We need to treat the smaller countries with respect, treat them as equal partners. We need not be like China. We need not be like US and Western powers, which have always believed in one-sided partnerships. If you look at China's investments in Africa, or the approach of US and European powers towards these poor countries, it has always been exploitative. It has always been self-serving. But India has stood apart from them. You can cite the examples of these projects which I discussed, how India has always offered mutually beneficial partnerships. So if we continue listening to the aspirations and demands and concerns of the global south, then India can truly be the global leader of the developing nations. We can use this unique position to bridge the gap as well between the developed global north and the underdeveloped global south. So that can be your conclusion. So let's see if you can write an answer based on what we have discussed, and please post your answers in the comment section of this video. So other students will also benefit from that. Now let's look at the next article. This article is related to the dramatic developments that are taking place in West Asian geopolitics. Ever since Donald Trump came to power, he has always been known for his impulsive policies and grand announcements, controversial policies as well. So Donald Trump, when he met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he made a very controversial proposal regarding Gaza. Regarding the future of Gaza, Donald Trump has proposed a very controversial plan which has been heavily criticized, not just by the opponents of US and Israel, even by the allies. Even the closest friends of US are criticizing this proposal by Donald Trump. So let's see what Donald Trump proposed. What impact will it have on West Asia? Will it really be implemented? And what will be the future of West Asian geopolitics? That is what the writer is evaluating. The writer Mahesh Sachdev has enormous experience in West Asian geopolitics. He has been a former Indian diplomat, an Indian ambassador who has served in this region. So he brings his expertise and insights into this column. That's why I think it's a very interesting article. So Donald Trump has proposed to remove Palestinians essentially from Gaza. He has said Palestinians in Gaza can be accommodated by neighboring countries such as Egypt, Jordan, etc. Basically, Gaza will be depopulated. That's what the statements of Trump essentially mean. See, Gaza is known as the world's largest open-air prison with 2.3 million Palestinians trapped by the brutally oppressive Israeli blockade. And the Gaza war of the last 15 months has decimated all the infrastructure and brought down Gaza completely, making it unlivable. So Donald Trump has called Gaza as a demolition site, which is filled with destroyed buildings, unexploded ordnances and ammunition. So he has suggested that we need to clear all the rubble, remove all the fallen buildings, remove the unexploded bombs, and pave the way for a new development in Gaza. Trump has suggested that Gaza should be turned into a Riviera of the Middle East, like a resort town, like a new commercial hub, something on the lines of Dubai. So this is the proposal of Donald Trump, which has been appreciated as well by few experts, by the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, calling it the only unique and fresh proposal in many decades with regard to the Israel-Palestine issue. But this proposal has triggered a major controversy. Experts have already criticized Trump. Those who oppose US and Israel have clearly taken a stand against it. Even the allies of US and Israel are opposing it, calling it an attempt at ethnic cleansing. Any attempt to depopulate Gaza to remove the Palestinian population would be seen as an attempt at ethnic cleansing, to remove an entire ethnic group and depopulate the group from a region, which is against international law. See, whether Trump will actually go ahead with the plan or not, this grandstanding by Donald Trump in itself is a big statement. See, Trump is known to make such big statements. See, don't forget, Trump is by heart a businessman, a very transactional businessman who believes in making deals, in announcing these grand deals. So Trump is known to take these grand positions deliberately sometimes as a hard bargaining position to create some leverage and then arrive at a mutually acceptable and a more moderate solution. It's like how your parents often negotiate with street vendors. A vendor might quote the price of a product at, let's say, 1,500, 2,000 rupees. But sometimes your parents will embarrass you by asking the same product for 100 rupees or 150 rupees. Right? I'm sure all of us would have had that experience where your parents will take, your father or mother will take that extreme position. If the vendor is saying the product is 1,500 rupees, your parents will ask it for 100 rupees. You even get embarrassed to even stand there. Right? But your parents are not serious about paying 100 rupees. They are just taking a grander position a more extreme position to create a leverage for themselves in the bargaining, so that eventually they can strike a middle ground. Eventually, your parents and the vendor will reach a middle point, maybe around 400-500 rupees, which is fair to both the sides, and the deal is struck. So Trump is like that. Trump is known to take such extreme positions, make such grandstand positions, and create a leverage by introducing the shock effect. Right? Trump knows very well what he is doing. Don't think Trump is just a mindless, erratic person. Right? And at the same time, it doesn't mean I'm praising Trump. I'm just presenting you one of the sides of Donald Trump. Trump does become a very powerful negotiator because of this. When he takes such grand positions, extreme positions, and creates a shock to the opponent and puts them on the back foot, eventually pushing them to reach a reasonable solution which will serve America's interests, which will serve Trump's political interests. So the plan to depopulate Gaza, and Trump has said US is going to own Gaza. It's not just about removing Palestinians and developing Gaza. It's about US owning the land strip entirely. So this plan may never materialize. It seems highly impractical. There is no possibility in reality that US can have see a takeover of Gaza and remove the Palestinians entirely and focus on its redevelopment. It's highly unlikely to happen. It's highly impractical as well. Right? And as I said, Trump is no fool. He's a good businessman. He knows what he's talking. By taking such grand position, he's delivering a shock to West Asian countries, to all the major players in West Asia, so that tomorrow when he negotiates with them, he will have an upper hand, he will have a leverage. He can push everyone to a certain solution which is acceptable to him, which is acceptable to United States, which can serve Israeli-American interests. That is what you're seeing. You're seeing a reconfiguration of West Asian geopolitics. In fact, when Trump was the president in the previous term, he had started a project to normalize West Asian relations by pushing the Abraham Accords. Trump was highly focused on bringing greater recognition to Israel, even at the cost of undermining the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian rights. Through the Abraham Accords, the previous Trump administration negotiated with United Arab Emirates and as well as with Bahrain, convincing these Arab states to recognize Israel and set up relations with Israel, which was a landmark development. Because until then, until the Abraham Accords were signed in 2020, prior to that, only two Arab countries in the Middle East, North Africa region had relations with Israel. One was Egypt, second was Jordan. Both Egypt and Jordan were forced following the conflicts in this region. After the 1967 Arab-Israel war, Israel had occupied the Sinai desert, the Sinai region of Egypt, creating leverage against Egypt. Egypt was convinced through Camp David Accords, with US mediation again, to recognize Israel and maintain peace with Israel, to end its war and hostilities in exchange for the Sinai territory. Similarly, Jordan, which had been weakened by the wars, secured a peace agreement with Jordan. Right? Israel managed to strike this deal with American mediation in 1994. Jordan also recognized Israel and maintained peaceful relations. These are the only two countries across this region, the Middle East, North Africa region, to have recognized Israel and have had ties with Israel. So UAE became the third Arab state, followed by Bahrain. Then few African countries also followed. Sudan and Morocco were also convinced by the previous Trump administration to recognize Israel and set up relations with Israel, which was a groundbreaking development. So Trump's grand plan has always been to bring Saudi Arabia on board the Abraham Accords, because Saudi Arabia is clearly the leader of the West Asia region, the most powerful country in West Asia, a leader of the Sunni world, and it wants to emerge as a leader of the entire Muslim world. So Trump's ambition has always been to bring Saudi Arabia on board this project to normalize a relation between West Asian powers, the Arab states and Israel, and settle the Palestinian question, even if it comes at the cost of the Palestinian people and their rights. But the Gaza war and whatever has happened in the last 15 months, it has changed everything on the ground. Now, for example, if you look at Iran, which had been a regional rival for Saudi Arabia, Iran has been substantially weakened. Iran led the Shia power bloc with its allies such as Syria, Lebanon, and its proxy groups such as the Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. This is how Iran had built a formidable axis of resistance against Israeli and American interference. But in the last 15 months, we have seen Israel decimating the Iranian axis of resistance. Hamas is more or less decimated in Gaza. Hezbollah has been severely weakened. Both these extremist groups have lost their top leadership. Israel has assassinated the top leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah, destroyed most of their infrastructure, their capabilities through overt attacks and through covert warfare as well. In Syria, Iran's best friend Bashar al-Assad has fallen. The Assad regime, the Shiite regime in Syria has fallen, and now a rebel group known as HTS along with other factions have assumed control in Syria. The Houthis, though they were seen as an irritant for US and Israel through their frequent attacks, they can be easily silenced, and Israel has already done that with support from US and UK. Repeated military strikes in Yemen has already weakened the Houthis, and they would never pose a credible threat to American or Israeli influence. So Iran is on the back foot. Iran has personally suffered a setback as well, as Israel has dismantled the Iranian proxy network through covert wars, and they even fought an overt conflict a couple of times, exchanging missiles and drones at each other, and clearly Iran has been pushed back. We are seeing Iran to be at its weakest in many decades. At the same time, the Shia and Sunni powers have achieved a detente. There is a sort of peace, a silent peace that has been achieved through China's mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So this creates the perfect condition for someone like Trump to reconfigure West Asian geopolitics entirely and push Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel. In fact, Saudi Arabia's leader, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is known to be quite close to Donald Trump. In fact, MBS has made a lot of commitments to take forward the close relationship between US and Saudi Arabia, and Trump is betting on Saudi investments as well. Recently, during a telephonic conversation, Mohammed bin Salman has promised hundreds of billions of dollars in investment in the US. So this oil and investment and security based relationship between US and Saudi Arabia has been the foundation of their West Asian geopolitics. US always wanted a control over the oil markets in West Asia with Saudi support, and that is what we have seen since 1970s. The US-Saudi alliance that took shape was primarily centered around the oil markets, and in return, mutual support for investments and American support for security in the region, which brings stability to Saudi Arabia. So now US and Saudi Arabia are looking to go beyond this. But however, when Trump made this proposal, the Gaza plan, the controversial Gaza plan, and even said that Saudi Arabia is ready to sign Abraham Accords, Trump announced that Saudi Arabia is all set to sign Abraham Accords to recognize Israel. Now, this was a big shocking update from the United States. Immediately, Saudi Arabia rejected these claims by Trump. Saudi Arabia distanced itself from these controversial claims and denied these reports that Saudi Arabia is going to sign the Abraham Accords, because things on the ground have changed. Maybe before October 2023, Saudi Arabia would have gotten closer to Israel. There was every possibility of this happening, because without Saudi approval, UAE and Bahrain would have never signed the Abraham Accords to recognize Israel. As Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunni world, the decision of UAE and Bahrain to sign Abraham Accords in 2020 would have been with the subtle approval of the Saudi Arabian regime. The detente between the Shia-Sunni rivals, between Iran and Saudi, was a big breakthrough that China had achieved. Things were actually normalizing. Maybe before October 2023, before the deadly attack by Hamas, Saudi Arabia might have gone ahead and signed Abraham Accords and recognized Israel. But now it is highly unlikely to happen, given the allegations against Israel in Gaza and West Bank, where Israel has not only annexed and snatched away Palestinian territory year by year, it has even used disproportionate force It stands accused of committing large-scale human rights violations, war crimes, and even committing a genocide against Palestinians. So in this environment, it is highly unlikely, it is impossible for Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel or to sign the Abraham Accords. Immediately, Mohammed bin Salman, his regime, rejected Trump's idea and the statements that Saudi Arabia was ready to sign the Abraham Accords. That shows the rift which has come up as well. That shows the changes that have happened in West Asia. But Trump might actually be onto something. Trump might actually have a valid point that Saudi Arabia and Israel normalization might transform this region forever. But of course, it can't come at the cost of Palestinian rights. Creation of a Palestinian state, implementing the two-state plan is fundamental to any progress. And that is what Saudi Arabia has been insisting upon. If Saudi Arabia is convinced that a Palestinian state will be created, Palestinian rights will also be protected, then definitely you might see a complete reconfiguration happening in this region. In that case, Trump is absolutely spot on that Saudi Arabia is the one country which can transform the region, maybe bring this conflict to an end. How? Because Saudi Arabia has the money which is needed to rebuild and reconstruct conflict-hit areas in West Asia. See, if Gaza has to be rebuilt, hundreds of billions of dollars is necessary. If Lebanon has to be reconstructed, its economy has to be uplifted. If Syria has to be stabilized, if Yemen has to be brought back to normalcy, then it will require massive funds, hundreds of billions of dollars in investments. And probably Saudi Arabia is the only country which can bring that kind of money, influence and leverage in this region. And Donald Trump knows that. US realizes that. Right? So there is a great potential here for Saudi Arabia to emerge as the leader of not just West Asia region, but of the entire Muslim world and provide for this transformation, provided if Israel respects Palestinian rights. Now, this is where a fundamental problem lies in Israel. Far right-wing politics in Israel, which has been championed by Benjamin Netanyahu, his Likud party and other ultra-radical nationalists, they are unlikely to agree on the Palestinian proposal. They have outright rejected the very creation of Palestine, though this has been the very basis of the two-state solution that the UN adopted in 1947. Now, without recognizing Palestine, providing for the creation of a Palestinian state, most countries will be unwilling to go ahead with close ties with Israel, especially in the Arab world. In fact, even India, though we are very close to Israel, we still maintain an ideological commitment to the creation of Palestine, which is the right thing to do as well, as Palestinian rights were snatched away by Israel and its imperial backers. Palestine was never allowed to be created when Israel unilaterally declared independence in 1948 and broke and violated the two-state plan with British and American backing. So no Arab country will ever accept any kind of normalization with Israel without addressing the Palestinian question. In fact, even UAE has threatened to revoke its signature to the Abraham Accords after the Gaza war started. So unless and until Israel recognizes Palestine, works with the countries here to create Palestine and recognize Palestinian rights, there can't be any movement on this particular subject. But definitely, Donald Trump is right that Saudi Arabia can be that country which can transform the region with American leadership. But however, don't forget there are many challenges as well. See, in West Asia, most countries are entirely dependent on the oil-gas market. Their whole economy is dependent on this. They might be ultra-rich monarchies. Problem is their economies are not diversified. In the coming years, they are going to face many challenges. Then United States, which has become the world's largest hydrocarbon producer because of its shale gas reserves, is enjoying that dominant position, influential position over West Asian countries because it is the world's largest hydrocarbon producer today because of its shale reserves. But extracting shale reserves is very expensive. The technology is very expensive. If oil prices were to crash and normalize, then America's shale industry would be hit. It will collapse. And this will again bring back the prominence of the West Asian oil monarchies. They would no longer have the obligation to listen to United States. So there are such challenges, economic, political challenges present. But definitely, Mohammed bin Salman, who has projected himself as a more moderate, more transformative, progressive leader, he can lead Saudi Arabia and give leadership to the entire region as well. But this requires responsible involvement of United States. It requires Israeli recognition of Palestinian rights. Such extremist positions will never be accepted by Saudi Arabia. If US and Israel can show that concession and ensure that Palestinian rights are protected and a Palestinian state is created, then definitely Saudi Arabia would not hesitate to set up relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia would not hesitate to invest billions of dollars in all these conflict hit areas to reconstruct and redevelop those regions, which can transform West Asia forever. So that is what we take away from this article. So Trump's ideas and plans might sound unrealistic, but there is a basis to what he is discussing, right? So if Saudi Arabia is nudged in the right direction, and if Israel shows responsibility, behaves as a responsible state, and if Palestinian state can be created, then there is a possibility where things could normalize. We might see a transformation of West Asia as well. So based on this, please take up this practice question. Try to write an answer for this question. Now let's look at the next article. On page 8, The Hindu carries a detailed article on the budgetary allocation for science and technology and research and development. Recently, the union budget was presented by the government of India. So based on the budgetary allocation for research and science and innovation, the Hindu is carrying out an interview with the leading experts in the field of science and technology. It has interviewed the Secretary to Department of Science and Technology, Secretary to Department of Biotechnology, the leaders of key scientific institutions such as CSIR, IISER, etc. So their views and opinions about budgetary allocation for science, research and innovation is being expressed in this interesting and important article. You can even expect prelims and mains questions based on this. So let's see what India's leading experts in science and tech think about the budgetary allocation for science, research and innovation. The Secretary of Department of Science and Technology appreciates the allocation of 20,000 crores for Department of Science and Technology to invest in private sector research. If you remember, in last year's budget, in the last budget, Nirmala Sitharaman had announced a 1 lakh crore corpus for scientific research in the country. So out of this corpus that was announced in the last budget, 20,000 crores is being allocated to the Department of Science and Tech, which is the lead authority, the nodal authority to lead scientific research, to make investments in private sector research, to groom our startups, to encourage private sector participation. And this is where the budget has taken a big turn, a big departure. Instead of just focusing on expenditure in public sector research, in funding government research institutions, there is a lot of focus on providing funds for the private sector so that they have enough research capital to focus on innovation and research and development. So this is something that the Secretary to Department of Science and Technology is appreciating, because this can bring our research institutions, academia and private sector together with our startups and corporates and focus on the sunrise sectors which are emerging, the deep tech sectors like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, etc. So this is in line with our national missions, the National Quantum Mission, the India AI mission, through which the government is providing the required support for the private industry, the research institutions and the academia to pioneer these cutting edge scientific research. You see a similar priority being given in the nuclear sector to promote the adoption of small modular reactors, which can transform our energy market. There is specific allocation for the geospatial mission. 100 crores has been set aside for the National Geospatial Mission, in line with the commitments that were made under the National Geospatial Policy of 2022. This might allow India to emerge as a global leader in the geospatial sector, where both public and private sector collaboration can transform India's research and innovation in the geospatial domain. There are many commercial, industrial and even military applications of geospatial technology. So India already has sufficient focus in the public sector through institutions like ISRO and its various arms and agencies. But bringing private sector and startups and academia together with public sector organizations is going to transform our initiatives in the geospatial domain. So these are some initiatives that need to be appreciated in this year's union budget. Then, according to Secretary to Department of Biotech, the allocation for biotech research has increased by 51%. 3,400 crore rupees has been allocated to Department of Biotechnology to pioneer biotech research. This can benefit sectors like gene editing. It can promote better advances in the field of medicine, in the field of agriculture. It can help in developing personalized, customizable medicine. Right? Nanotech and biotech together can transform the medical industry with better interventions and better diagnosis and treatments, which could also bring revolution in the agriculture sector. So the government has approved the BioRide scheme for this purpose to promote entrepreneurship and initiative for innovation and research and development in the biotech sector. Those founders and startups which will invest in this sector will get direct support and incentives from the government with the higher allocation which has been given in the budget. Then you have a national mission on high yielding seeds which has been made a priority in the budget so that we can focus on developing high yielding variety of seeds which are climate resilient, which are drought resistant, which can withstand the impact of climate change and improve our agricultural productivity. This is much needed to strengthen our agriculture sector, to make our agriculture climate proof. Then the Bio E3 policy has been supported for promoting bio-manufacturing, which is in line with the commitments of National Manufacturing Mission, which has been a flagship initiative of the Modi government to boost domestic manufacturing, to make India self-reliant. So all these initiatives in biotech industry can transform our research landscape. Then the director of CSIR, India's leading scientific institution, has also pointed out that the government has made some right announcements in this year's budget. For example, look at the focus on funding the floriculture and aroma missions led by CSIR, which can benefit our farmers, bring additional income to our farmers. Then look at the support the Modi government has given for promoting millets, right? Not only domestically but globally as well. We are promoting millets for its nutritional value, for its climate resilient nature, and we are trying to bring back and create a millet revolution, and CSIR is leading that millets mission. So the additional allocation for these specific missions is highly appreciated by these experts and leaders. Similar allocation has been given to the cotton mission in line with the national cotton mission. Even if you look at green hydrogen mission, indigenous manufacturing and smart packaging, the seaweed mission, then learn and earn program for promoting women entrepreneurs. Right? The government has made some right allocations in the union budget which can create the right base for scientific research, development and innovation and entrepreneurship. Then if you look at the nuclear sector, there are some big announcements that have been made. Since last year's budget, the government has been talking about small modular reactors. The government has set a very ambitious goal of scaling up our nuclear energy sector to increase the share of nuclear power in our energy basket to 100 gigawatts by 2047. This will not only help India reduce its emissions and meet our climate action targets in the Paris Agreement, it will also make our energy sector more sustainable, more self-reliant. It will reduce our dependency on imported hydrocarbons. So that's why the focus on small modular reactors is going to be a paradigm shift, because generally nuclear reactors are very large in size, requiring large investments, large areas of land, taking many years to complete. That's why nuclear projects take forever to be designed and completed. But small modular reactors with a capacity of less than 300 megawatts, which matches the global safety standards laid down by International Atomic Energy Agency, can be easily set up across the country, from a government building to a shopping mall to an apartment complex. Small modular reactors can be set up almost like a generator, like a diesel generator. Imagine the impact it can have. If each city could have multiple SMRs generating nuclear energy, powering our cities, powering our economic transformation, this could make India self-reliant, reduce our dependency on imported fossil fuels. So this focus on boosting small modular reactors is highly appreciated by the former secretary to Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. See, India already abides by all the global standards when it comes to nuclear safety, nuclear security. We have signed the IAEA safeguard agreements. We have opened up our civilian facilities and reactors to IAEA inspections. We follow the strict global standards as well when it comes to nuclear safety. We are in line with all the global conventions as well. So India has great potential in the nuclear sector with small modular reactors. That is something that experts have been appreciating. But however, there are some downsides as well. There have been some shortcomings in this year's budget with regard to science and tech allocation. For example, it appears that the government is more driven by the mass hysteria that you find in the domain of science and technology as well. Right now, the world is obsessed with deep tech, with AI, with quantum computing, etc. Of course, these are the emerging domains which require the highest focus and attention. But it appears as if the government is sidelining basic science research, sidelining curiosity-driven research for more fancy projects. Is it worth the effort and money to spend precious resources on hard to achieve technologies when we don't focus on basic research which can make fundamental difference in the long term? Just like the corporate sector and investors, right? The venture capitalists who chase immediate results and profits by investing in the most hyped sectors and hyped companies, eventually leading to a crash. It appears the government is also chasing such immediate results in the technology domain, which is quite alarming. The writer says, the expert who has been interviewed here says that the government hasn't paid much attention to curiosity-based research. The old world traditional classical research conducted in institutions like Indian Institute of Science, for example. Such projects have not really been prioritized in the budget, whereas more fancier projects like AI mission, quantum mission, they have received a higher priority. While giving priority for newer technologies is good, you can't neglect basic science. If you look at the major scientific powers of the world, look at Japan, Germany, they never became scientific powers by neglecting the classic traditional STEM domain. Without focus on science, tech, engineering, mathematics, you can't become a strong scientific powerhouse. Look at China. China has managed to do both. It has managed to pioneer the new technologies as well, and it has strengthened its basic foundational scientific research. But unfortunately in India, and it's quite alarming and concerning, it appears we are almost neglecting basic scientific research because it's not that exciting. It will not bring profits. It will not bring immediate results. To bring actual scientific advancement, it will take decades of research, decades of investment with no profits at all. So private sector doesn't really invest in this sector because it's not attractive and profitable. The government was the one which was pioneering this sector, but now it appears even the government is moving away towards the more attractive sectors, and it appears to neglect curiosity-driven scientific research, which is quite dangerous and alarming in the long run. And also, in order to roll out small modular nuclear reactors, government is looking to amend the Nuclear Liability Damage Act, which has been opposed by many foreign suppliers. Because under the Nuclear Liability Damage Act, right, the parliament pushed for an amendment that allows for the original equipment manufacturer to be also held liable in case of a nuclear accident. Generally, international standard as per IAEA global standards is that whenever there is a nuclear accident, the one who has to pay compensation to the victims will be the operator of the nuclear plant. Right? The liability towards the equipment supplier, the one who designed and built the reactor, should be limited. It should be capped at a certain limit. That is the global standard. But India's nuclear liability law goes against the global standards. Because of the lessons we learned from Bhopal gas tragedy, right? The parliament pushed for certain amendments which provides an opportunity for victims to sue those original equipment manufacturers who designed and developed the reactors and seek compensation from them as well in case of a nuclear accident in the country. So it's not just the operator of the plant which will be liable. Even the designer, the manufacturer would be held liable. So this has deterred the global nuclear companies from investing in India. Now the government is looking to make this easier, to bring down these strict regulations by amending the law so that we can scale up small modular reactors. But according to the writer, this is a double-edged sword. While it might bring India in line with global standards on nuclear liability, it might attract foreign investments, bring global nuclear companies to India, scale up installation of small modular reactors. But what if there is a nuclear tragedy? What if victims don't get the right compensation tomorrow? Right? It will be a repeat of the Bhopal gas tragedy and the way in which India let down the victims of Bhopal gas tragedy. So the expert here is warning about these consequences. In a rush to attract investments and to introduce these paradigm changes in nuclear sector, we should not take such blind decisions where we weaken the liability standards which could affect our people in the long run in case there is a nuclear tragedy. Then experts also point out how important institutions have not received the right funding. Central universities have got just 4.3% of the share given to science and tech sector, whereas IITs have received a higher share. The problem here is that basic science could suffer because of this. Even if you look at the allocation for Indian Institute of Science, IISERs, which lead basic science research, their allocations have not really increased. It has even decreased as well in some cases, whereas allocation for IITs has gone up significantly. So this might produce more engineers needed for the entrepreneurial transformation, technological transformation, but then who will be left to push forward basic scientific research? The national education policy talks about an expenditure on education of 6% of the GDP, but the government is nowhere near that number. To achieve this target, you need to spend at least 10% of the budgetary allocation on education, with significant percentage being allocated to science, basic science, central universities in particular. But this year's budget goes against this. Current allocation is just 2.54% of our GDP on education, which is way below what national education policy has recommended. So this in the long run could weaken our scientific base. It could weaken our hold over the STEM domain. We may never become a scientific leader like, let's say, Japan, Germany, or even like China. India would never be able to compete without focus on hardcore basic research. You can't compromise long-term interests for short-term gains. That is what we need to take away, and that is one criticism which is being brought out. Next, we have an important editorial. Let's take a quick look at this, and then we have few small articles which will help us wrap up today's analysis. India-Sri Lanka relations have perpetually been affected by the fishermen dispute. In recent months, the fishermen issue has propped up again. So let's quickly understand this issue. See, quite often Indian fishermen from Tamil Nadu and Puducherry cross over into Sri Lankan waters. This is basically a violation of international law, and it can be seen as poaching, because according to UN Convention on Law of the Sea, whatever resources are present in the exclusive economic zone of a country belongs exclusively to that particular country. So Indian fishermen can't fish in Sri Lankan waters and steal the fishes from Sri Lanka. The reason why fishermen from Tamil Nadu, Puducherry are forced to venture into Sri Lanka or into Sri Lanka's EEZ by crossing the India-Sri Lanka maritime boundary line is because we have exhausted our fisheries on our side. By resorting to exploitative forms of fishing such as bottom trawling. In coastal Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, many fishermen who get a lot of subsidies from their government, the state governments, they have procured mechanized boats and they practice this highly exploitative form of fishing called bottom trawling, where fishing nets are dropped to the bottom of the sea floor and dragged on the seabed with the help of mechanized boats. This increases the fish catch, it increases the profits for the fishermen, but it will catch everything as well. Even the non-edible organisms will be caught, which is highly detrimental for the marine organisms and the food chains in the marine ecosystems. That's why in many critical ecosystems, bottom trawling is banned, it's prohibited, but it continues unabated along India's coastline, particularly in Gulf of Mannar and Park Bay region. So Tamil Nadu fishermen, Puducherry fishermen have more or less exhausted the fisheries on our side, because due to bottom trawling, we have never given enough time for nature to replenish the fish. So now Out of desperation, Indian fishermen cross over the maritime boundary line, especially the poor fishermen who have smaller boats, who can't afford to practice bottom trawling. What they do out of desperation, they cross the maritime boundary line, entering Sri Lankan waters, trying to fish in Sri Lankan waters. So this results in clashes with Sri Lankan fishermen from the northern province. Sri Lankan fishermen from Jaffna obviously oppose the entry of Indian fishermen, resulting in clashes between them. Then Sri Lankan authorities, the Sri Lankan Navy and Coast Guard, they act upon this very seriously. Quite often, Navy and Coast Guard of Sri Lanka open fire as well, killing Indian fishermen, or they damage the Indian boats, they detain the Indian fishermen and boats. So hundreds of fishermen are arrested and detained and even punished in Sri Lanka. So this remains a major issue, a very emotive, controversial subject in Tamil Nadu. In fact, last year alone, 500 Indian fishermen have been detained by Sri Lanka. The numbers were very high in the 80s and 90s when the civil war was raging, because it was the same route which Tamil militants were also using, right? So then Sri Lankan Navy Coast Guard would be more aggressive in targeting any vessel and boat in this region. Also, Sri Lanka often would complain that India was responsible for the ethnic conflict. And as a result, Sri Lanka would take revenge against India by targeting the fishermen. So in 80s and 90s, such incidents were very high where our fishermen were targeted, or they were shot or killed or injured or arrested and detained. But over the years, due to our diplomatic relations improving, the issue had been slightly tackled. We even have a joint working group on this issue. We spread better awareness amongst our fishermen, prevented them from crossing over as much as possible. And we also urged Sri Lanka to act soft on these fishermen. So for some years, things had improved. The number of fishermen being targeted and detained had gone down. But since last year, it has increased again. I'm telling you, in last year, 2024, more than 500 fishermen from Tamil Nadu, Puducherry have been detained. Many have been punished by the courts and sent to a long jail term as well. These are the highest numbers in the last 1 decade. In this year alone, it's hardly been 1 month and few days, hardly 40-45 days in the new year. 77 fishermen have already been detained by Sri Lanka. And the numbers are only going to increase. So it's very important to resolve this issue between the two countries as soon as possible. It is a humanitarian issue. Of course, Sri Lanka is right that Indian fishermen cannot violate its sovereignty. We can't be poaching Sri Lanka's fishes from its exclusive economic zone. We have a duty and obligation to prevent our fishermen from crossing over. At the same time, Sri Lanka also has a humanitarian obligation to go soft on the fishermen. It need not injure them or open fire and kill them. Let it detain, but have a process of repatriating the prisoners eventually to India. See, we face similar problems with other countries as well, like Pakistan, Bangladesh, with whom we share maritime borders. There are few Indian fishermen who have been detained in Saudi Arabia, Qatar as well. But the numbers are very small. Though India, Pakistan have the same issue, the numbers are still small and manageable. But with Sri Lanka, the magnitude of the problem is much, much severe. So immediately this issue needs to be resolved. We need to ban bottom trawling, enforce the ban, spread awareness amongst our fishermen, give them the right training so that they don't cross over. You can't allow your fishermen crossing over the international maritime boundary line. This is a breach of international law. So Indian authorities have been working on this by training the fishermen, giving them GPS navigation kits and satellite-based transponders so that they know where they are located, so that they know that when they are crossing over into Sri Lankan waters, they shouldn't cross the line. So that kind of spatial awareness is being provided with the help of technology. Plus, there needs to be a deterrent and better incentives. The state government of Tamil Nadu and central government both have a responsibility to incentivize the fishermen to move away from bottom trawling and replenish our fisheries. So we need not venture into Sri Lankan waters. This is the only long-term solution. In the meanwhile, we have to convince Sri Lanka to not use aggressive methods against Indian fishermen. Let it use the legal methods, whatever the Sri Lankan law says. Sri Lanka has every sovereign right to do that, but it can at least desist from using aggressive methods. That is what India can request for. Next, one last big article. We have three actually articles in today's newspaper on page 1, 12 and 13 regarding Trump's new proposal for tariffs. Trumps and tariffs, there's nothing new about it, correct? But Trump has announced that he won't hesitate from levying 25% tariffs on all iron and steel imports into the United States. The US imports most of its iron and steel from countries like Canada, China, Mexico. These are the top suppliers of steel and aluminum. Understood? Canada, China, Mexico, they are the top suppliers. So Trump is mainly targeting these countries and threatening a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports into the country. Now, this might have an impact on India. This is like a deja vu moment. Back in 2018, we had faced a similar situation where Trump had levied tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, which hit some of India's steel and aluminum exporters. India is a major exporting country of steel and aluminum. Now, the good thing for India is that our exposure to the American market is very less. See, India produces 145 million tons. India produces 145 million tons of iron and steel and aluminum each year. Out of this, very small percentage is headed towards the US as exports. Just 95,000 tons is our export to the US. Even if Trump were to levy 25% tariff, even if these exports were to stop, it will not have a detrimental impact on our iron, steel and aluminum industry. Clear? Because our exports of iron, steel and aluminum to US is very minuscule. Just 95,000 tons out of 145 million tons that we produce. So the direct impact is limited. We are not really worried about the direct impact. In fact, the Secretary to Government of India for the Steel Ministry has said the same, that look, we need not be worried, we need not be bothered too much because our exposure to American market is very less. Even if those exports were to stop, we will not take a hit. But however, this might have a bigger indirect impact on the global steel and metal and iron and aluminum market. This could lead to global disruption because tariffs by America will be met with counter tariffs by other countries. Others are going to respond, triggering a cyclical trade war where the world enters into this vicious cycle of tit for tat, targeting each other with higher tariffs. Eventually, this might disrupt our exports to other key markets. Eventually, this might take a hit on domestic production as well. So India can't really escape the impact. We may not be directly impacted, but there will be a significant indirect impact. Now, these are some of the issues that Prime Minister Modi will be bringing up with Donald Trump when he meets the US President in a couple of days. After visiting France, right now PM Modi is in France attending the AI summit till tomorrow. Then he'll be traveling to United States and he'll be one of the first initial dignitaries to meet Donald Trump after Trump became the president. So India will definitely be bringing up the issues, but reports are indicating that India is trying to go soft because we don't have leverage against the US. India can't really target the US or counter the US. Our leverage is very limited. Now, if you look at the stand India took on the deportation of illegal migrants, right? India barely protested against the harsh methods that US used. Reports are very clear that Indians were detained, handcuffed, humiliated. Their dignity has been compromised. Yet the government didn't say a single word against Trump and the US because we know that we are in a weaker position, right? US has all the leverage to punish India if it requires. We depend on US for critical defense supplies. Now that is what Trump is hoping for. He wants India to sign more defense contracts. So India is trying to appease Trump and the US in some way because reports indicate that India is going to show that, look, we have very low tariffs when it comes to specific American imports into India. Because see, previously when Trump was the president, he had called India a tariff abuser. He equated India with China and others and called India a tariff abuser. Now he has clubbed all the BRICS countries together, threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS countries if they push for de-dollarization. Despite this controversial statement, India has not said a word about what Trump has said against India. The reason is India wants to showcase to Trump that we are not a tariff abuser. We actually have low tariffs for many American products. Now take, for example, the concessions we have given to American almonds or key American agricultural products like hay and alfalfa. We have given a lot of concessions to even American walnuts, because see, this will not hurt our domestic market, right? We are very sensitive when it comes to, let's say, rice or pulses or dairy industry, even meat industry. We don't want our domestic industry to suffer. But these sectors which are more crucial to America, which are not so critical for India, we can open them up. We have levied very less tariffs in the past, allowing for greater American exports to India. Now we are considering the same for pecan nut. Previously, we used to impose 100% tariff on pecan nut, which is a big export for the Americans. Now we have reduced it to 30%. And Prime Minister Modi is likely to pitch that will further reduce these tariffs so that US farmers will benefit. Now this will not hurt Indian farmers, it will not hurt Indian domestic production, because we have no domestic production of pecan nut. So this is how India is trying to appease the US, trying to show that we actually have lower tariffs for key American products, and it's actually a win-win situation, a mutually beneficial relationship that we have. Modi might even pitch for restoration of the GSP status that Trump had previously withdrawn. During the previous administration, GSP, Generalized System of Preferences, this status was withdrawn for India, which was benefiting our exporters. The US gives the GSP tag as an incentive, which gives preferential treatment through low tariffs, almost zero tariffs, which will help developing countries to increase exports to US. India was a beneficiary of this scheme, but we were removed from this status. Now India will try to pitch for the restoration of the GSP tag. So there is a clear attempt from India to showcase to the US that we are not a tariff abuser, that America can also benefit by trading with India, by increasing exports to India, while creating a path for Indian exports to the US. So we need to wait and watch for the upcoming visit. We'll have a detailed discussion, maybe a separate session as well, on Modi's visit to United States and France. So this completes my detailed analysis of all the big articles in today's paper. Now let's take a quick look at the prelim section. On page 12, we have a very interesting article that refers to a convention which is frequently not in the news. So I feel it's quite rare for this topic to be reported. It can be relevant for the exam. It's called the Cape Town Convention and Protocol. India is bringing a bill in the parliament to abide by the global standards laid down under the Cape Town Convention and Protocol. The Union government has introduced a bill in the Rajya Sabha known as Protection and Enforcement of Interests in Aircraft Objects Bill 2025 in the ongoing budget session. This will allow India to match the global standards, which will help Indian airline companies to recover the movable assets in case of financial bankruptcy. See, in the airline industry, right, companies will have global deals, mergers and joint ventures which are being run. If, let's say, a company goes bankrupt, right, and the assets of the company are present abroad, those aircrafts, the engines and the components can be recovered by the Indian company. Similarly, foreign companies which have Indian ventures can recover their assets. So to facilitate the exchange of these mobile equipment in the aircraft industry and airline industry, there is a global convention for this called the Cape Town Convention and Protocol. It was brought out in 2001 by the International Civil Aviation Organization along with UNIDROIT. UNIDROIT is a UN organization that focuses on private law. So International Civil Aviation Organization has drafted this international law called Cape Town Convention and Protocol that facilitates global cooperation to recover aerial assets like aircrafts, engines and other components which are movable assets of a company in case of bankruptcy proceedings. So India is a signatory to it. So we are abiding by these standards. We are one amongst the 65 parties to this convention, and to abide by these global standards to facilitate our airline companies as well to recover their movable assets, we are bringing a law in the parliament. Next, President Putin has threatened the United States that Russia may not extend its commitment under the New START treaty, which is all set to expire next year. The New START stands for New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It's a critical arms reduction treaty between US and Russia. It is going to expire next year in February 2026, on 5th February. Russia has said if things continue as it is between US and Russia, it is not going to extend the treaty it might bring an end to the arms reduction treaty. Russia has already suspended its compliance with the New START. So in this context, the statement by Putin is very important. So let's quickly see what is the New START treaty. As you know, US and Russia have thousands of nuclear warheads with them. During the Cold War especially, they had entered into an arms race. So to prevent a possible nuclear apocalypse and to bring down the arms race and the tensions, arms reduction treaties were worked out. One treaty was the SORT, Strategic Offensive Reductions Treaty, also called the Treaty of Moscow, which lapsed by 2009. So to replace this, the New START treaty was worked out, which has replaced the Treaty of Moscow. There have been other arrangements as well, such as START 1, which expired in 2009, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 1, that lasted from the end of Cold War till 2009. This mandates the reduction of warheads and the stockpiles and the delivery systems. That's how US and Russia have been gradually bringing down their nuclear arsenal. Then they were negotiating START 2 and START 3, which never came into effect. To replace START 1, START 2 had been finalized, but it never entered into force as both sides didn't agree on the final commitments. START 3 was never completed. The negotiations were never concluded. So the arms reduction treaty right now for strategic weapons, that is nuclear weapons and nuclear delivery systems, is the New START, the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that replaced the Treaty of Moscow. It was signed in 2010 by then President Obama with the Russian leadership, came into force in 2011. So this is going to expire in 2026. If it is not renewed or replaced with a new treaty, then US and Russia will be left with no arms reduction treaty. You might remember that Donald Trump has already withdrawn from Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF. Russia as well. Russia, US both have walked out of the INF, where it allows them to develop their intermediate missiles with shorter ranges, triggering a new arms race that includes China as well. It was Donald Trump who pulled US out of INF treaty during his last presidency because he wanted to compete with China, which was developing more intermediate range missiles with nuclear capability. As US withdrew, Russia also withdrew, and this has triggered a new arms race in the medium range category. Right? Now, with strategic arms, with intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear delivery systems, the only treaty which is holding peace between US and Russia is the New START. So, Russia has already suspended its compliance with the start of the Ukraine war and the American sanctions. When Western sanctions were imposed, right? Russia suspended its participation, but it has not withdrawn. It's still part of the treaty, it's not withdrawn. It has only suspended its participation, it's not abiding by it. So, if US Russia don't work it out by next year, right, New START will lapse by February 2026. Then coming to the last article. On the supplement page, there is a reference to something known as the Bombay blood, a very, very unique blood type. You would have heard about A positive, B positive, AB blood group, O positive, O negative. You might have heard AB negative, O negative are very rare blood types. But trust me, the rarest of all the blood types is the Bombay blood, which is different from the ABO category. See, when we say the ABO blood type, it's identified because of the H antigen which is present. And as you know, there can be cross blood transfers between different blood types. Right? For example, a O positive donor can donate to every other blood type. Right? So, ABO category of blood type is more accommodative of different blood groups as it contains the H antigen. But there is a type of blood called Bombay blood, which is very rare. It's a very rare occurrence. It's almost 0.0004% with regard to its occurrence. That is 1 in 4 million. Out of 4 million people, one person might have this rare blood type called the Bombay blood. It's named after the city of Bombay, where it was discovered in 1952 by Y.M. Bende. So those who have the Bombay blood type, they don't have the H antigen. Either it is absent completely or it has mutated. So as a result, the A and B antigens cannot be formed. See, in the ABO blood type, the reason why cross transfers are more easily possible is because of the H antigen A and B antigens can be formed, and with the right match, you can transfuse the blood. Even transplantation of organs can be done, even if the person is of the other blood type. But in case of Bombay blood, the H antigen is absent completely, or it is mutated. So as a result, those with Bombay blood type cannot receive any other blood group. None of the other ABO blood groups can be provided. But despite this complication, recently in Chennai, a successful cross blood transplant has been done on a patient with the Bombay blood type. So this is a big scientific breakthrough, a medical breakthrough, where a cross blood transplant has been successfully performed in Chennai despite the patient having the rare Bombay blood type. So just for sake of prelims, know what is the Bombay blood type. Essentially, it's a rare condition where the person doesn't have the H antigen, or it has mutated, which means they can't form A and B antigens. They can't receive ABO blood groups. They just require the Bombay blood type. That's the only blood type which is acceptable for those people. On this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope the analysis has been useful and you've learned all these key topics. Let me know what you think in the comments. Press the like button if you like the session, and do subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.